And it's good for us to think about that. As we come together here, whether you call us non-denominational or multi-denominational or whatever you call us, we come together because we have a shared bond that we want to worship our Lord in a shared language of English. That's why we're here. Whether that is our first language or not, that's not necessarily the main point, but it is a language that we come together to share and worship the Lord in. That's why we meet here. That's why the International Church of Lucerne exists. We have a word for that. We call it expats. So we are a church for people who are not in their home country but want to come together and worship the Lord. So regardless of our background, if we can attest to the basics of most of the creeds, the finer points in life, the main things, as we say, keeping the main thing, that's what we come together with. And those things that divide us, that separate us into different denominations, are not the things we want to pay too much attention to and focus too much time on. So we need to ask ourselves, if that's what we're here for, are we just here to create a nice Christian environment for expats to get together on a Sunday morning? Or do we have a wider purpose than that? And obviously as a pastor, I believe we have a much wider purpose than that, that we are here for much, much more. So what is the purpose of a healthy church? Not rhetorical question. What's the purpose of a healthy church? Glorify God, someone said. Yes. Bring the good news. Very good. Any others? Personal relationship with Jesus, to encourage that and instill that and help others to have that. Yep. There's no right or wrong answers here. I'm not trying to look for a right answer. I just want to hear what people think it is. Because I think all those answers are correct. All those answers are right. They're all good things. But yes, they're all those things. We want to share the gospel with people. And today that's what I wanted to talk about. As one aspect of what a healthy church is sharing the gospel. Last week we talked about the fact that a healthy church is a church that loves. And this week we're talking about a healthy church is a church that shares the gospel in a culturally relevant way. But we need to understand our culture to do this well. Now I've been looking up some statistics on Swiss Christianity, and I've got some Swiss statistics here. Now, how many people in Switzerland? Anyone? Roughly? 8 million. Rounded off the even million, 8 million. Out of those, 25% are expats, so that means there's 6 million Swiss people. So out of the 6 million Swiss people, only about 2/3 to 3/4 say that they have some kind of faith, and that's either Reformed or Catholic. The statistics I found wouldn't even go into free churches like us. We're not even counted in those numbers. They don't consider that we exist, so we're not counted in their statistics. But it's a minute percentage of the Swiss population. So you're either Reformed or Catholic if you're a Swiss person, or nothing. And the nothings are a very small portion of the Swiss population. It's about 30 to 35%, depending on who you ask, are the ones who say they're nothing. So out of those, 4 million are considered Christian then. So out of 6 million, about 4 million consider themselves Christian. Out of those, only 16% say that religion or faith is important. Out of those 4 million, only 16% consider faith or religion is important. And this is, I think, I don't want to pick on the Swiss because this is a worldwide phenomenon in the Western world. We call ourselves a Christian nation, regardless of where you come from, whether it's Australia, America, or Switzerland, or England, or whatever. We say we are Christians. Germany is even trying to, well, not Germany, Bavaria is, I heard on the news, is wanting to introduce a law that all government officers have to have a cross up in their office to proclaim that this is a Christian state of a Christian country, so that people know that. And of course, there's been some pushback against that idea for a lot of people saying we're pushing, instead of being free for religion, we're pushing religion on people. So some proclaim to be Christian, but yet they really don't think it's that important. And this is what I think is what we call immunising people against faith. What we do is we give them just enough of the disease that they can fight against it, but not enough of the disease that it can completely take them over, if you can consider the Christian faith a disease. They get a little bit when they're first born and they get introduced to the church, but they're done. That's it. They're saved. They don't need to do anything else from there on in. That's it. That's all you need to do, because once you've done that, you can't leave God's presence. You're now in God's presence. You don't have to do anything else for the rest of your life. That's it. So therefore, of course, religion doesn't have to be important to you. It doesn't have to be anything you do or say or have a part in. If that's all that church is for you and you've been done, whether you've been dedicated, confirmed, baptised, doesn't matter how you go about it. If you've joined the church in one shape or form or another, then that means it. That's it. For some people, it's just by paying their church tax. They pay their church tax and they're saying, that's it. That's all I have to do. I don't have to go to church. They've got my money. That's enough. When I die, they'll bury me for myself, and that's it. And they're happy to pay their church tax to be able to do that. Those people have been immunised against the gospel. And it's really hard to try and share the gospel with people like that. I find the same story in Australia as well. Because they think, I'm already in. What are you sharing the gospel to me for? I don't need to hear anything more. Yet you look at their lives and their actions and what they do, and they're not living as Christians. They certainly don't know the Bible. They certainly don't know Jesus as a personal Saviour. They don't know God the Father as their Father. They don't speak to Him on a regular basis. They don't have any idea of that. In fact, some of them might even go so far as to say they don't believe in all of that kind of stuff, but it's just a nice myth to have in your background family so that your children should learn the myths of your past. And it's really hard to share your faith with people like that. Paul's common practice was to go into an area and go to the believing Jews and Gentiles. Now, believing Gentiles were Gentiles who wanted to be Jews but couldn't be because they weren't born into a Jewish family, so that they started to follow the same rules as the Jews. So these are people who believed the old stuff from the Torah and what the Jews believed. He would go to them and he would explain to them this Messiah that they've been waiting for was actually Jesus. That was his practice. That's what he did. Then he comes to Athens. Completely different ballgame. Completely different story. He starts off by doing that, but Athens is a place that loves ideas. Athens is a place that likes to talk about things and new concepts and new ideas. That's why we get all these philosophers come from the Greeks. Plato, Socrates, all these people. That's what they liked to do. Now we get the feeling that in this passage that Paul was taken to a group of philosophers who wanted to hear this wonderful story they had to share. When in actual fact it was probably more forceful than that. It was more like, hey, you come here and explain what you think you're telling to the people, because it's not what we believe. Now, as I said, I was in Athens and saw some of the wonderful things they have there, but of course it's all modernised now. You've got all big multi-storey buildings where there would have been these places where these idols and temples were. But where Paul was standing on Mars Hill is a big rock that is right next to the Acropolis and the Parthenon, and you stand on that rock, you can quite clearly see the temple to Athena built up there on the hill. Athena, the goddess of wisdom. That's why they all have an owl that symbolises God of wisdom, Athena. She's up on the top of that hill. That's the name the city's after. So when he's talking about temple made with human hands, he's probably pointing to that temple up there, going, that temple up there, God doesn't live there, as if he needs us to give him anything. And they've got all these shrines to the unknown God, or to several gods, because they believed in multiple gods, and they had shrines made out of gold and silver and marble. As our guide said, if you can sell marble to the Greeks, that's like selling ice to the Eskimos, because there's marble everywhere. I was surprised, the footpaths are made of marble. Everywhere you go, the steps are made of marble. I couldn't afford a marble bench top for my kitchen, but these people, you just walk on the marble, it's fine for them. So we're not just a club for Christians here. Because if Christians want to find us, they will. We've got visitors here, and thank you for coming along, and it's great. We love having visitors, and we want Christians to find us, and that's excellent. But that's not our primary task. That's what we're here for too. We want to get together as a family of Christians and say, we love each other, and let's show the world that we're believers by our love. We want to do that. So we welcome you, and don't get me wrong, that's not saying we don't want to do that, but it's not our primary goal. Our primary goal is to not just reach the expat Christians. Because I have plenty of expat Christians who write to me on the pastor's email address and say, when's church, what time, how do I find it? And they come along and we visit and we welcome them and they come in and join in the church, and that's fantastic. They found us. There's so many ways in this electronic day of data that you can find us. And just as a little aside, I found out recently that we, each one of us, is subjected to as much data in our daily lives as a person from the Middle Ages would have experienced in their entire life. That's how much information we take in on a daily basis. And that's how many opportunities you have. You Google English-speaking church in Lucerne, our name will come up in the top 2 or 3 lists every single time. I've tried it, and from several computers to make sure it works that way, because that's how we get people to find us. But that's not our main primary purpose. Non-Christians don't go looking for an English-speaking church and then Google us and then come along and say, okay, tell me about God because I want to be saved. That would be easy, wouldn't it? If they just walked through the door and said, come on, let me have it. But most of them don't know we exist. Most people would walk past the front of this building, and I'm sorry, they would not even know it was a church. Most of the time, people would look at this, and it just looks like a normal apartment building, because we have people say they've tried to find it and couldn't find it because they were looking for a church. You know, how kids draw a church building with a steeple and a cross on the top and a triangular roof, and we don't look like that. There are churches around town who look like that, but we don't. So people walk past here, they probably even don't know what we're doing. They don't think negatively about us because they don't even think about us. They're going past, they're riding their bikes, they're walking their dogs. I'm seeing them go past the windows now. They're going up to the mountains, they're going skiing, they're going hiking. They don't care about us. Not in a bad way, but it's just like, oh, well, that's their thing. Let them do their thing. They're not interested. But our job is to talk to those people. And as an expat church, our job is to talk to the expats in the community. No offence, but our job isn't to evangelise the Swiss people. There's apparently 4 million of them, and there's Swiss churches are trying desperately to do that themselves. If Swiss people come to our church, you're welcome, we love you, we're brothers and sisters in Christ, and we want to have you here. But again, not our primary goal. Our primary goal is to be here for those people who have come here from another place who need to worship in English because they can't speak the local language, or they want to be around people that they feel comfortable with because we speak the same language. And we come from all sorts of different backgrounds and communities and ethnic groups and countries. As you've seen, we have visitors come, and there's always somebody who comes from the country that you came from or the place that you came from. So we get plenty of people here that come from all over the place. So how do we share our faith in a society that thinks it's already Christian but is clearly not? Now we get into some big words, because we have had a system of church which we call a tractional church. A tractional church is a church where if we just play the coolest music and have the coolest pastor and have the grooviest building and have the most beautiful people standing up the front, then people will come to our church. If we have the best programs and the best deals for people, we just advertise it and they'll come. If we want to reach out to the skiing community, all we have to do is have a special skiers service and they'll come to our church. And we'll put on a great skiers service and we'll use skiers jargon and we'll get them to come along and get them to share our faith. That's what we call the attractional model of church. Now that's different to attractive, but we'll talk about that later, because it's okay that the church is an attractive place. People should be drawn by us to faith. That's okay. But the way we go about evangelism is called attractional. That's called attractional. The other option is incarnational, which is what Jesus did. He came as one of us. Now, Jesus didn't come as one of us, and we learn this at Christmas time. He didn't come as one of us to learn how we are. He didn't come here on some fact-finding mission from the gods. He came so that we could learn what God is like. He came to the people that needed saving. He came into our mess, into our dirt, into our sin, and came to us and met us where we were and shared his faith with us. He didn't invite you to the synagogue. He didn't ask you to come to church. He went to where the people were, where the people needed him, and went where he went. That's the attractional versus incarnational concept. You can understand it probably like in the old ways, missionaries used to go into the world. And in the old days, missionaries would go into a far-flung country, and to convert everybody to faith, they would first have to make them sound, look, and dress exactly like Western people. They'd have to teach them English so that they could teach them the gospel. You know, as if the English-speaking world has got a corner on the gospel itself, which obviously we haven't, because Martin Luther was a German and he was the first one to put the Bible in an everyday language. But that's what they would do. And they would change entire cultures to try and reach them for Christ. That's not the way that we do missions now, is it? When you speak to missionaries now and you hear about what they're doing, they're learning the language. They're hanging out in the local restaurants. They're meeting the local people. Their kids are going to the local schools, to the local playgroups. They're joining into the communities. They're being a part of what's going on. Rather than an outsider living outside of the community, they're going into the community and becoming one of them to reach them. That's what we call incarnational ministry. It's kind of like when a church wants to put on a playgroup for mums. And I've seen many churches do it, and I've helped some do this as well. It's not necessarily a bad thing to do. It's okay to do that. But what I tend to find is that when we do a play group, I don't know what else you call it in other parts of the world. Does that translate across cultures, play group, little kids going along with mums and dads? When you get a play group, what ends up invariably happening is you get lots of people from the church who have kids who get together and have a Christian play group. But very few non-Christian people come along to the Christian play group because they feel a bit strange coming into a church building for anything. So it's a bit weird having a play group. So then what we try and do is we have a Christian play group but have it somewhere in the community. We try and do that. Now, my way of thinking, and I think this is what Paul would say too, is if we want to be truly incarnational, what we would be doing would be sending our mums and tots and kids into the play groups that already exist in the community and letting them be incarnational in those play groups, equipping them on a Sunday and during the week so that they can share their faith on a very real one-to-one level with the people in where they're at, in their mess, at their time, rather than trying to somehow inoculate them against the gospel by singing Bible songs and Bible stories to their children on a Wednesday playgroup time in church, but going there and being a part of their lives. And some of the best success stories I've had with young mums is when they've said to me, I went along to the local playgroup, made friends there. There is a lady there and she's got cancer and she's on her own. She's a single mum. She needs help, and the church stepped in and helped her with babysitting, taking her to doctor's appointments, just loving her and caring for her as a church would. She wasn't a part of our church. She didn't attend our church. She didn't even attend our church playgroup. She's just someone who's connected to someone in our church who happens to be a lady who went to this playgroup. That's incarnational ministry. That's getting your hands dirty amongst the pagans, as Paul was doing in Athens. Paul was clear that to reach a culture, you had to get to know them. You had to earn the right to share the gospel. As Daniel shared before, he's spoken to this guy so many times, and that now he finally got the courage to share something with him about his faith. You have to earn that right to share the gospel to people. I don't think it's as effective standing on a street corner with a bullhorn saying, you guys need to listen to this. You might get one or two. It might work sometimes. But it's not the most effective way of sharing your faith with people. And in fact, you might be inoculating some people against that kind of a message. But in 1 Corinthians 9:21, Paul says, I have become all things to all people that I might save some. To the Jews, I became a Jew. To the Greeks, I became like a Greek. I became all things to all people that I might save some. The body in the Christ in the West is shrinking. Not because God is irrelevant to the people, but because we have spoken to people about God in a completely foreign language. We speak to them in a way that they don't understand because we don't bother to get to know their culture. You can grow up in a place and not understand the culture you're living in. I grew up in Australia. That's where I grew up. That doesn't mean I understood the culture I was living in. Just like a fish that grows up in the ocean. You try and explain the ocean to the fish and they'll go, what are you talking about? It's just the ocean. This is just where I am. What do you mean this is the ocean? Trying to explain their culture to someone who's living in it is very hard. But you don't always completely understand the culture that you're living in. Particularly if you, like me, and you grew up in a Christian home, went to church on a Sunday, went to youth group, went to Sunday school, listened to Christian music, read Christian books, didn't have anything to do with worldly, and I came from a Baptist background too, so that was like, can't do this and you can't do that and you can't watch movies, and that was pretty tough. My parents were a little bit more lenient, but still the church was very, get rid of those albums that you've got in your albums, or those big black round things that you used to listen to music on. Get rid of your albums because they're evil, they're bad for you and you shouldn't listen to that kind of stuff. If you grow up in a Christian bubble, you can forget that the culture around you is completely different to you. I've seen this happen at a church barbecue where we invited the local people to a church barbecue. We had a church barbecue on, we put it up in the car park, we had a sausage sizzling on barbecues, and we had sauce and onions and all the things that you do in an Australian barbecue, and even a few salads as well to keep the ladies happy. We did all of that kind of stuff. And of course, what do you expect in a church barbecue? You've got a church barbecue and you invite your neighbours along. What do you think Australians are going to bring to a church barbecue? Beer. And of course, all the Christian people are looking going, oh my goodness, they're bringing alcohol onto the church property. What are we going to do? You don't understand the culture you're living in if you do something like that and don't expect what's going to come with it. That's what they expected. That's what happens at a barbecue. We'd be much better off having a barbecue with our neighbours. Invite your friends over for a barbecue in an Australian context. Might be a bit hard when you've got to have a barbecue on a balcony here, but, you know, invite your friends from work around for a meal rather than inviting them to church for one. Paul's got this new audience because now he's speaking to Greeks who don't have the same worldview as Jews. So he can't share with them why Jesus is the Messiah because they wouldn't have a first clue about who the Messiah is meant to be because they're not Jews, they're Greeks. They don't know anything about this history. That's not their shared background. That's not their shared culture. So Paul has to come up with a new idea. The first thing he does is he speaks to them in their language. Most of us here are multilingual. We have to be because we're living in a foreign country. We have to learn German so that we can get along in German culture. So we learn German, we learn Swiss German. Some even have to learn French and Italian as well because it's a multicultural country where you speak lots of languages. So we have to learn several languages, let alone the language we grew up in, and maybe the language of our mother was separate to the language of our father. We might learn many languages in our lifetime. Paul was multilingual. He was the ultimate expat. Everywhere he went, he was in a foreign place from himself. You know, Paul was actually from Turkey. Tarsus is in Turkey. So he's actually from Turkey to start with. Yet he spoke Aramaic so he could speak to the Jews. He certainly spoke Latin because he was a Roman citizen, and he could speak Greek. He could speak Greek because he was going to the Greeks. So he speaks to them in their language, which is very important to do. He uses their beliefs and points to the temple on the hill and the statues that are around him that are carved out of marble and gold and silver and all the things that are around him. Because they're around him, he's using examples from what they are using in their community. He's using their own cultural icons to share the gospel. Paul uses the Greek culture to address the Greeks. He even uses one of their poets. He quotes one of their poets, even as some of your poets would say. He's done his homework on the culture that he's in. He didn't attack it or ignore it, but he used it as a way to share his message. Now, that doesn't mean that he appreciated their culture. It says that he saw all of these idols and he was angry about that. But he didn't use that anger to then attack their culture. He used that and channeled it in a way to say, hey, what you call unknown, let me explain it to you. This is what's really the unknown God. Paul uses that shrine. He sees one shrine, he goes, now I know how to get through to this culture. And he uses that shrine to get through to these people. Now, there's a story about a couple who are missionaries who are trying to serve a community of people. I think it was in Papua New Guinea. And they're trying to reach them with the gospel. And they were struggling because this community found trickery as a positive trait. So when they heard the Jesus story, they saw Judas as the hero of the story because he tricked Jesus and got some money for it. So that was a good thing. So how do you share the faith, your gospel, with people who see that kind of a thing? So they did their homework, they did their research, they learnt the language, they found out some of the cultural stories. And then they find out about the child that they would use as two tribes were warring and fighting against each other. They would switch children, the peace child. And so the head of one group to the head of the other group would then hand one child over to that tribe to look after, and that child would go to that tribe to look after. And nothing was allowed to happen to the peace child because that's what kept peace between them. That tribe brought up that child healthy and happy and comfortable, and that tribe brought up that child happy and healthy and comfortable. When they heard this story, they go, now we know how to share the gospel. And then they were able to start saying to these people, Jesus was the peace child, and Jesus was killed. And then they started to have success in sharing their faith. They learned the language, they learned the cultural icons, they learned a way in. They didn't adopt their culture, but they learnt about it so they could then share their faith and get an opportunity to share the gospel in a way that was relevant and they understood. We've been doing the same thing, speaking the wrong language to the people around us, even though in technical language terms we are actually speaking the right words. We're not putting it in a way that they can grasp and understand. We need to start asking, what is the unknown God in our culture? Now, it's not Swiss culture I'm talking about here, because that's not our culture. We're expats in a Swiss community. That's the culture around us, and we need to submit to that. Otherwise, we're going to struggle in all sorts of ways because we'll end up driving on the wrong side of the road and doing all sorts of dumb things. So we need to submit to Swiss culture, I have no doubt about that. But that's not what I'm talking about. Because culture comes from many different backgrounds. It's not just the country we're from or the ethnic group we belong to. Culture can come down to very many different subcultures, right down to teenagers. You can't bag teenagers all together in the same group because you have teenagers who are skaters, who are into skating culture, and that's a completely different subculture to teenagers who are into surfing, completely different subculture, or teenagers who are into BMX bikes, or teenagers who are, now I'm showing my age, into all sorts of different things. There's different subcultures even when it comes to teenagers. You can't lump them all together in one group. What I'm talking about is the people that are in our circle that we know. That is our mission field. We don't need to go to a foreign country, we're already even in one. Even if you're a Swiss person and you're living in Switzerland, you're in a foreign country because you've got the mission field of those people around you to share the gospel with, where you get an opportunity once in a while when they're sick to say, can I pray for you for that? That's who we've got. Whether we work with them, whether they're our neighbours, whether they're our family members, and that can sometimes be the hardest group to crack, family members. We need to understand their culture and find out what is the unknown God to this culture that we're trying to get to. What's an aspect of the culture that we are in that we can say the gospel is good news in this area? It's entirely possible that we could start with something like, you know, you guys are always seem to be chasing likes on Instagram and Facebook. Do you know that there's a God who loves you just the way you are? Doesn't care what kind of filter you've used to make yourself look good in that picture. Whether you woke up with a big zit on your nose or not, he doesn't care less. He loves you just the way you are, and he wants to have a relationship with you. That could be one way that we find a bridge into that culture to share the gospel with them. Do we then talk about the fact that we've fallen short of God's idea for our lives? Of course. But we need to find the bridge to connect in first. If we just go running around telling people they're sinners and they're going to burn in hell if they don't turn to Jesus, no matter how true that is, it's not really going to get a good hearing across. If Paul would have done that in Greece, it would have been true, but it wouldn't have worked for him. He came in and said, I see this altar to an unknown God, and started using that to then hit them with, this is the one God, and he let you get away with it for a while, but now you now know what's going on, so now you need to follow him. And he gave them what they needed to hear. But that takes time and effort and energy, and it's hard. And it's not something that we want to do when things are hard. We want to give up on that, don't we? Because today's culture is obsessed with acceptance. They are absolutely obsessed with acceptance. Look around you. If you don't see what people are obsessed with, if you think people are obsessed with a screen, you've missed the point. They're not obsessed with the screen, they're obsessed with the little red things that pop up on the screen that tell you you're beautiful, your comment was funny, you're worthwhile, you're a good person. That's what they're obsessed with. It's not the actual piece of glass in front of them, it's what's inside there that they're obsessed with. They need to know that there's a God out there who loves them and cares for them and doesn't care about all of that kind of stuff. What can we learn from Paul's example when we're sharing the gospel to people? And here are some points that I thought we could learn. This is things we put into practice about what we know about Paul. First, we need to learn the culture that we're trying to reach. Probably a step further forward than that is to accept the fact that the culture you're trying to reach isn't the Christian culture, because you need to just accept that it's a different culture to what you expect it to. So look at the culture that you're trying to reach and learn everything you can about that culture. Doesn't mean you become a part of that culture, but you learn about that culture. Learn to speak their language. And I'm not just talking about linguistics here. I'm not talking about learning German or learning French or whatever. But learn to speak to them in a way that they will hear you. Actually, there's a funny story of this have anyone seen the movie Bruce Almighty? No? Yes? A few of you? Bruce is given God's abilities for a day or something like that. God comes to him and says, Bruce, I'm going to give you my abilities because you think I'm doing a bad job. And so Bruce, when he starts to talk to people, starts to say, yea, verily, I, they, thou, and he speaks to them in this weird language. And all of a sudden he thinks like he's got to speak in a different language to speak to these people because he's got God in him. We don't need to do that. When we speak in Christianese to people, they don't get it. We need to speak to them in a language they understand, in a way that they'll understand it. So speak their language. Don't attack the culture to share the gospel. Use it to find a bridge to the gospel. Find the unknown God in the culture that you are trying to reach. And I know this can be controversial for some, but that's what I mean at Christmas time. We all know that Christmas came from a pagan background. But we've taken that and used that as a bridge to the gospel to say, what you celebrate as the winter solstice or whatever, let me tell you what I celebrate it for. I use that to celebrate the birth of my Jesus Christ because he came for me so that I could get to know what God was like, so that I can live the life that I need to live. That doesn't mean that you become a pagan and following all the pagan principles, but you use that as a bridge into that culture. Earn the right to share your faith. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I can't remember who said that. I think it was Rick Warren, but Google it, you'll find out who originally said it. It's not mine, I'm not claiming it. But it's well worth remembering. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I was a salesman, I sold furniture for many years of my life, and I specialised in beds. I sold beds for a living. So I know pretty much all there is to know about beds, everything there is to know about beds, and I had to know everything. Coil thicknesses, how springs are tempered, why they are done that way, why this bed's made this way. And I was told at a very early age when I got into this, you need to know everything, but you only tell a customer as much as they want to know. Because if I tell the average customer about spring thicknesses and how coils are tempered, they wouldn't care less. They'd say, is it comfortable? You know, they don't want to know all the science behind it. Is it comfortable? Some people wanted to know all the science behind it, so then you have to know all of that so you can share that with them. So you need to know a lot, but they also need to know that you care enough about them. You have to earn the right to share your faith with people. And that's the hard part. Because if you make friends just so you can share your faith, they'll figure it out. They'll work that out and they'll know that you're not being friends with them for the right reasons. They know that you're just being friends with them so that you can get a chance to crack them with the gospel. So you earn the right to share your faith. What do you need to do to become, or what do you need to do or become to reach your culture? Are you a stay-at-home parent? That's your cultural group, your mission field. Are you a business person? That's your cultural group, your mission field. Are you a brother or sister and you've got family members who aren't followers? That's your cultural group or mission field. And you need to earn your right to be there. And finally, don't expect that everyone will convert. Remember that in Corinthians, Paul said he does all these things to win some. Athens is considered one of Paul's failures. It's not one of those stories where everybody believed and became Christians and the whole of Greece was turned to Christianity overnight. No, there was only a handful of people who believed him, but that was enough for Paul. Don't expect that your job is to convert every single person you come across. It didn't work for Paul, it didn't work for Jesus.